Hey guys, Dr. Goodin here, back with another lecture. This time we're talking about nutrition strategies for body composition alteration. This is part 2 in the 3-part series on chapter 10 from the Essentials of Strength Training and Conditioning textbook put out by the NSCA. In this lecture, we'll be talking about how to put on muscle mass, or how to advise your athletes to put on muscle mass, some general recommendations for that, as well as general recommendations for how to lose body fat while maintaining that muscle mass that you've worked so hard to gain. Now, first things first, before we get into the material, I need to state that I'm not a registered dietitian or a nutritionist by any means. I'm a strength and conditioning coach. I'm a professor of kinesiology, and that is my scope of practice. So these are all just recommendations and information that can be found in the textbook that we are going through as you study for the CSCS certification test. You may find this lecture helpful, or if you're just looking for general recommendations on how to build muscle mass or lose body fat, then this lecture is for you. I would also refer you over to Renaissance Periodization's YouTube channel with Dr. Mike. Tons of really in-depth information over there. So after you've listened to this lecture and you want some more, you want to go a little bit deeper, head over to their YouTube channel. I can't recommend it highly enough. Okay, well, let's get into this material. All right, this comes from, as I said, chapter 10 in the Essentials of Strength Training and Conditioning textbook. This chapter was written by Marie Spano, who is a registered dietitian. Now, we need to first talk about the energy requirements. This is the starting point for all calculations of increases in caloric intake or decreases in caloric intake in order to alter body composition. Now, obviously, we measure energy intake in kilocalories, kcal, or just calories for short. The energy or caloric requirement for any human being is defined as energy intake equal to expenditure, resulting in constant body weight. So your energy requirement, if you took that in and exactly that on any given day, it would result in no change in your body mass. Now, on any given day, we take in probably a little bit more or a little bit less than that. But over time, if you're at a stable body weight, it all sort of evens out and balances out. When you're feeling full and you have plenty of nutrients, your body is going to naturally have more energy, and you might partake in more activity, or even just walking around more or fidgeting more, getting rid of some of that restless energy because you are well fed and you have plenty of energy stores. And it will kind of balance out those slight overages on your caloric intake. If you're taking in less, then your body tends to be more lethargic, you have less energy, you're not going to just hop up out of your chair or bound up the steps, and so your body tends to try to keep you at a set point or at that stable body weight. It's not really until we start to deviate consistently from those energy requirements that we can start to put on size, hopefully muscle mass if you have your macronutrients partitioned correctly in your weight training and providing a good stimulus for hypertrophy, or in the alternative scenario, if you've decreased it consistently, that we can experience some fat loss. So these are some factors influencing energy requirements. The first is the resting metabolic rate. So just how much energy does your body burn at rest? Things like male versus female will affect that. Things like the amount of muscle mass, lean body mass that you have will affect the resting metabolic rate. We also have the thermic effect of food, and this just refers to the amount of calories that it takes to actually physically digest your food that you're taking in. Some food has a higher thermic effect, such as things with a lot of fiber or that are difficult to digest or that are high in protein. And then finally, and the one that might be the most obvious to most of us, is physical activity. So the more physically active that you are, whether that's by lifestyle or in your occupation or in training, right, in sports and in training, then the greater the energy requirements will be for you. Now, this next slide is an example of different BMR, basal metabolic rates, or RMR, resting metabolic rates, energy requirements for an individual. I'll let you guess who this individual is based on the details there. It might be me, maybe not. I don't know. We'll see. Who knows for sure? But this individual, who's probably very handsome, is 178 centimeters tall, 82 kilograms of weight, age 33, body fat percent is at 12, and then therefore the lean body mass is at 72.078 kilograms. Now, based on the 4 energy requirement equations, 3 are for BMR and 3 is for RMR. Now, the difference here is that the basal metabolic rate, this is like if you're sleeping or in a coma or something, this is the base number of calories to keep you alive. Resting metabolic rate is if you're awake and alert, but just resting, you're not moving. Now, you can see that there's a pretty big difference in the numbers calculated from each of these equations, right? There's a big difference in the daily calories required. So if we look at the Mifflin-St. Jeor, it says that I would need 1,774 calories per day for my basal metabolic rate, whereas the Katch-McArdle says I need 1,926. And there's different ways to calculate these. These all have different equations based on different criteria. So the Katch-McArdle and I believe the Cunningham equation are both based almost entirely on lean body mass, whereas the Harris-Benedict and the Mifflin-St. Jeor are based more on your age and your weight and your height and your sex. But these are just ballpark figures. There's, of course, inherent error in these equations. The only 100% guaranteed way to calculate your actual energy expenditure is to either be hooked up to a metabolic cart all day long for several days and take the average, or to live in an environmental chamber where everything's controlled and they can measure the change in temperature and the exhaled gases that you're breathing out and all of that fun stuff. So here's an example from the text of how energy needs can be loosely estimated, emphasis on loosely. Athletes can also, in conjunction with these estimations, use food diaries during periods of stable body weight to determine energy requirements. So if you're logging everything that you eat with like MyFitnessPal or something like that, then you can get an estimate of your caloric intake, compare that to your current activity levels, and then that would be your total energy requirements for the day, not just your resting metabolic rate, but your total energy requirements. Or we could use this table. So we take a look at this table, looking at light activity levels. So if you are a male who has light activity for the day, this would include walking slowly, garage work, electrical trades, carpentry. So you're like moving, but it's all sort of gentle movement. Maybe you bus tables at a restaurant. Maybe you do house cleaning, maybe it's childcare, which, don't get me wrong, all these things can make you tired, but it's considered light activity levels. Then if we're going by kilograms, you should be taking in 38 calories per kilogram of body weight per day on top of your resting metabolic rate. For moderate activity levels, this is slightly faster walking or things like weeding, hoeing, you know what I mean, garden tools, cycling, tennis, skiing, dancing. These would all be considered moderate activity. Now, I don't know about tennis though. I feel like, man, tennis can be so strenuous. And if you're a tennis athlete, especially on game day or practices, those things can drag on and on and on. I don't know if they are actually less physically active than, say, if we look down in the heavy category where it says climbing or basketball. I mean, who's to say basketball versus tennis? I'd have to see the research proving to me that a tennis player is not burning more calories than a basketball athlete. However, this is what's listed in the textbook, so we're going to go with it. And we can see the different multipliers there, 38, 41, and 50 calories per kilogram per day. Now, when we're talking about weight gain should often be, depending on your sport, often be done in the off season. We should focus on weight gain in the off season because for a couple of reasons. First reason is because it requires very strenuous training to really optimize hypertrophic adaptations, right? So we're training with sets of 6 to 12 on any given day. We're using full range of motion, high muscular tension movements, and we are eating massive amounts of food to support that muscle growth. Muscle is a very expensive tissue. So we should really focus on this outside of the season. A general guideline is to consume approximately 500 additional calories per day. Now that's a very general guideline, because what if you have an incoming freshman female soccer athlete who is maybe quite skinny, needs to put on a little bit of muscle mass just to be a more resilient athlete? Should she be taking in 500 extra calories per day versus your senior football linebacker who maybe he wants to put on 5 pounds of muscle? 500 calories for him is going to be very different than your very small, tiny female soccer player. Okay, so this is a very general guideline. Also, in general, we should eat enough protein to maximize gains in lean body mass. So if we're taking in a ton of extra calories, but it's all carbohydrates and fat, and our protein intake is low, maybe closer to the RDA, which is, what was it? We just talked about it in a lecture. I think like 0.7 grams per kilogram body weight is very, very low. Then you're not going to support the building of muscle, the muscle protein synthesis required to actually create new contractile proteins. So you need to take in 1.5 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight per day to support optimal levels of muscle growth. I've even seen higher than this, up to like 2.2 grams per kilogram of protein. And of course, we want to throw in the caveat that we should seek for our athletes regular nutrition counseling or coaching by a sports dietitian or a sports nutritionist with an advanced degree. So more than just a bachelor's degree, because they can identify maybe potential flaws in things like the rate of gain that you're pursuing, perhaps is unhealthy, or flaws in the level of food that you're eating in such quantities that might actually be deleterious to your health. Instead of just supporting muscle gain, there might be some side effects. So always want to pursue that nutrition counseling. Now, for weight loss, this should also be done during the off season primarily. There are some times, for instance, in, let's say, endurance sports, where as you're training and sort of getting into the season, people, you hear the term, quote, race your way into shape, which is a very general way of saying, like, as your normal training progresses, you may not even be able to sufficiently resupply enough calories to keep up with your endurance training in a good way, right? So I'm not talking about a state of energy imbalance, which is chronic, and then you have the whole, low energy availability syndrome, but maybe more where you come in from the off season and you have a little bit of body fat to lose. And as the course of your normal training progresses, you're not on any type of diet or caloric restriction. It's just that your training is so voluminous that, hey, you're actually starting to lean out a little bit as you race your way into shape. And I've experienced that as an endurance athlete myself in college. Now, talking about where we make those deficits in our energy intake, right? So if we're looking for about a 500 calorie reduction per day, should that come from protein, carbohydrates, or fat? Well, we definitely don't want it to come from protein. We want to keep protein high, maybe even higher than before, up to 2.7 grams per kilogram of body weight, because what we don't want to happen is we don't want our muscle to start wasting away. Remember, muscle is expensive. It's an expensive tissue for the body to keep. And so if the body is saying, hey, we have this caloric deficit, what are we going to get rid of first? Well, let's let go of this muscle because it's metabolically costly to hold on to it. So we want to keep the protein intake high to keep muscle protein synthesis going in the right direction, at least staving off the catabolic effects of dieting. Whether you should take your deficit mostly from your carbohydrate intake versus your fat intake, well, actually research shows that there's not really any difference between the two. So for athletes, because carbohydrates are so important for fueling activity, most likely we should reduce fat first. That said, fat is very flavorful. Yes, it's 9 calories per gram. So it's maybe easier to reduce fat first, but it's not very tasty and it's hard to adhere to over the long term. So take away from the fats first and then maybe small reductions in calories, especially if you're not an endurance athlete or you're not working with endurance athletes, rather, as you're counseling your athletes. But just make sure that you're still fueled for the activities at hand. And again, this should take place usually in the off season. Now, it's really important to note that there is no ideal diet. So things like intermittent fasting or the keto diet, right, or other low carb diets, or going plant-based or vegan, right? There's no ideal diet for athletic performance. There are some really good principles we can stick to and some heuristics that we can follow, things like energy balance and macronutrient distributions and making sure we have the key vitamins and minerals in the diet. And athletes need to choose an approach that they can, 1, adhere to, that 2, meets their protein requirements, and that 3, make sure they get all of the vitamins and minerals to stay healthy. Now, we do need to talk a little bit about what constitutes things like being overweight or obese, because sometimes we do have athletes, especially in strength and power sports, things like American football, or sometimes track and field athletes who are throwers, who might be in the overweight or the obese category. So obesity is technically defined as having a BMI of over 30 kilograms per meter squared. That's obesity. And being overweight, is defined as having a BMI of between 25 and 29.9 kilograms per meter squared. Now, technically, I'm in the overweight category, right? And I'm not, I'm not huge. I am gaining a little bit around the midsection as I get older, but muscular individuals, even people who are not incredibly muscular but have a little bit of extra muscle, can find themselves in that overweight category as far as BMI goes. I think mine is like around 26. I'm trying to get to 27. I'm trying to increase it up to 27 because for me, it's the muscularity as it increases. As I win all of those hypertrophies, then my BMI ticks upward. Now, BMI is not a great measure for an individual of their health. It's not a great measure for an individual of even the amount of fat that they might have, because muscle counts against your BMI the same way that fat does. What it is good at doing is giving the dietitian or the physician just a red flag to say, oh, that's a very high BMI. Let's make sure that it is due to enhanced muscle mass and not due to increased fat mass. Now, if we're basing it off of body fat percentage, the guidelines for women are 32% and for men 25%. So anything over that would be considered potentially obese for men and for women. Being obese does come with increased risk of morbidity due to all of the following: hypertension, dyslipidemia, coronary heart disease, gallbladder disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, respiratory problems, and various cancers. So the initial goal for weight loss in an overweight or an obese individual should be 10% of initial weight over 6 months. So we're looking at a long-term goal. And again, remember, this is coming from a strength and conditioning textbook, not from a sports dietitian. This is not me telling any of you what to do or telling you to tell your athletes what to do, but rather this is a guideline that may be put forward by the sports dietitian that you refer your athletes to if any of them are struggling with obesity and it's affecting their sport performance. Now, a little bit more on body mass index. As I said, it's often used to assess risk for diseases that are associated with more body fat. However, it's a measure of excess weight. It does not distinguish between fat, muscle, bone, etc. We calculate it using one of the following equations, either weight in kilograms over height squared, or weight in pounds over height in inches squared times 703. Now, the key point here is that the body mass index should not be used as a diagnostic tool, but instead as an initial screening tool to identify potential weight issues in individuals and to track population-based rates of overweight and obesity. We're calculating this, let's say, in a doctor's office, so that the hundreds of people who visit that doctor's office and who visit the other hundreds of clinics in, say, a state or a country, we can gather that obesity data, or the BMI data rather, and then just look at the distribution of overweightness and obesity in a country. So really it's more for looking at trends in populations or as an initial diagnostic tool for individuals. Now, some things that are not so good to do when you're considering weight loss for your athletes or for yourself. Rapid weight loss often tends to lead to massive rebounds back to your original body weight. So we don't want to pursue rapid weight loss usually. There are some very, very few instances where things like a water cut before a weigh-in might be advantageous to sport performance, but you really need to work with a professional on that. Don't handle that yourself as the strength and conditioning coach or the sport coach. Here are some potential dangerous weight loss techniques. Things like fasting, prolonged fasting especially. Intermittent fasting, everybody's tried that before. That's probably okay. Consult your physician first. But fasting for more than 18 hours could be potentially dangerous for athletes, especially if they're training during this. Certain fad diets. Have you heard of the banana diet? Look it up. Enough said. Voluntary dehydration, self-induced vomiting, laxative abuse, and inappropriate use of thermogenic aids like ephedrine or caffeine. Now, all of these things can result in all of these bad side effects, such as loss of lean body mass, that muscle that you've worked so hard to gain, now you're losing, undue fatigue, headache, mood swings, dehydration, heat illness, muscle cramping, dizziness, suppressed immune system, that sounds bad, hormone imbalances, that sounds bad, hypothermia, reduced muscle strength, decreased plasma and blood volume, low blood pressure, electrolyte imbalances, kidney failure, fainting, even death, folks, even death. So don't pursue rapid weight loss techniques outside of the capable hands of a professional who is certified and qualified. Okay, that wraps up this lecture about how to pursue body composition alteration for ourselves or for our athletes. Again, these are very general recommendations. For more on this, check out Renaissance Periodization's YouTube channel or consult your physician or sports dietitian. In the next lecture, we will be covering eating disorders. I know, not a very fun topic, but as a strength and conditioning professional who cares for your athletes, it's really important to be able to spot the telltale signs of an eating disorder and to know that you are not the person to deal with that. We should be referring our athletes out and caring for them in a multidisciplinary way, right? With the physician, with sports medicine, with the dietitian or sports nutritionist, and of course with the care of the coaches. So we're going to talk about eating disorders next in part 3 of chapter 10. If you guys have questions, let me know down in the comments. It was great being with you. I'll see you guys on the next video. But as a strength and I can't even say strength and conditioning. Strength and conditioning, strength and conditioning, strength and conditioning.